The treatment of the clones after the end of the war and the Clone Wars, as well as the subsequent rise of the Empire, is one of the coldest and most heartless actions by the Imperial regime and the populace of the galaxy as a whole. It's widely known that after the war ended, treatment of the clones was particularly abysmal, as clones were cast aside and treated as disposable relics of a bygone era that no longer had a place in the galaxy, despite their valiant years of service under the Galactic Republic, a republic that would one day betray them too, just as they betrayed the Jedi. While the Empire's treatment of the galaxy as a whole was heinous, the treatment of the clones specifically was notably egregious. As we saw in Obi-Wan Kenobi, they are now homeless, hoping to beg for a hot meal, if of course they are still around, due to their accelerated aging process. Many of the clone troopers aged quite rapidly and quickly died out, not able to sustain good enough medical care or even, as we saw here, get a hot meal at all. But this raises another interesting in Star Wars lore. Despite their heavy mistreatment, why specifically did the clone troopers come to respect Darth Vader of all people? What did the infamous Dark Lord do that made the clones respect perhaps the most formidable entity within the Empire, and a symbol of Imperial power? Well, stick with us today, weary acolytes and students of the Force, and let's delve into this relationship that Darth Vader had with many of the clones under the Empire's new rule, and how Vader and the clones came to find a more mutual understanding and respect, if even admiration for one another, and answer the question why the clone troopers actually loved Darth Vader. For the first duration of his career, Vader actually refused to work with conscripted soldiers that weren't clones, refusing to work with naturally born individuals, and clones made up the entirety of his first legion, formerly known as the 501st, the same clone battalion that Anakin Skywalker commanded. Darth Vader cited his experience in the Clone Wars and his tenure working under some of the best soldiers that the Republic had to offer as the primary reason why he wanted to specifically enlist retired clone soldiers, and why again he outright refused anybody that was not a clone trooper. As Anakin Skywalker, Vader and the 501st were legends on the battlefield, laying siege to separatist operations and working on the forefront of the galaxy's largest conflict with incredible efficiency. Needless to say, the clones had earned Darth Vader's respect, even if they themselves didn't know who he was or why he respected them so immensely. The rumor that he was once a former Jedi served as an ample explanation for the clones though, and although it seemed as if none of them knew precisely which Jedi he was, his affinity with the Force and skills with a lightsaber seemed to lead many to the conclusion that Vader was in fact Anakin. But of course, they would never say a word. He was also aware of the inhibitor chips within the clone troopers' heads, and Palpatine allowed Vader to work with clones simply because he knew how easy they were to control. He understood that by default, he would always have a leash on Vader's forces in case something were to go terribly wrong, though Vader had much more faith in them than that. Many of the clone troopers who were enlisted to work under Vader in turn grew to respect him due to their previous treatment under the Empire by both the citizens of the new regime and the Imperial officers themselves, as the new Imperial officers treated the clones exceptionally poorly and cast them aside nearly immediately. But Vader did not. Vader seemed to be the only one that still understood their great worth. After the war, the clones were deemed obsolete. They did not retire with any benefits, nor assistance. They could not find jobs, and they were blacklisted from multiple industries for the perception surrounding them. The history of the Clone Wars was a stain on the Empire, and many associated the clone troopers themselves with their failures during the war, unjustly holding the clones directly responsible for this new existence, which many of them despised. This led to an innate prejudice against clones for much of the Empire, and it led to the clones having a particularly hard existence under the Imperial banner. Thousands of clone troopers were left homeless, destitute, and without any aid whatsoever, so to see the most feared Imperial enforcer that the Empire had to offer reach out a hand and offer them a lifeline earned their undying respect. By account, and by many clones, Darth Vader was their savior. However, this meant that despite their best wishes, the clones were again drawn back into combat once again. While many troopers had hoped for a peaceful retirement and a life on their own away from the war, this simply would not be the case for many of these veterans. No job would take them, nobody would even house them, yet one of the Imperial commanders would enlist them to do what they did best, which was fight. Until the clones were ultimately removed from the Empire entirely, they fought alongside Vader bravely and accepted their positions within this new age. This served to deepen the connection that Vader had with his forces, as he always addressed his soldiers with the respect and admiration that they deserved, even though Vader would not give the same respect to officers, and the clones likewise found a tolerable working relationship with the Dark Lord of the Sith. From here, they would venture across the galaxy, hunting the very same Jedi that the clone troopers of the 501st had once been enlisted to fight alongside. While the work wasn't pretty or glamorous for the clones who had essentially lost everything, it was a paycheck and a commander who respected them as individuals during a time when they were destitute. As the troopers began to get phased out, however, Vader lost much of the authority to keep them in line, and there were actually a few reasons why Palpatine thought it would be best to phase them out of the Imperial army entirely. Even Darth Vader's First Legion, Palpatine cited that in the very same way that they were too easy to control, they could also be too easy to be turned against Vader, citing the very same inhibitor chips and the events of Order 66 as evidence to him. While some clones were left on the roster as trainers at the Imperial Academy, most clones were cast aside yet again and left to fend for themselves. Vader, likewise, was saddled with a battalion of inept new recruits that lacked the training, experience, and discipline of a soldier. But the unfortunate reality was that due to the advanced aging of the clone troopers, they too were becoming obsolete, and too inept to serve directly under Vader. Most of the stormtroopers were simply everyday citizens, though, who sought to feed themselves and their families in this new world. While some agreed with the Empire's agenda, many did not have their heart invested in the fight to nearly the same degree that the clones had. Clones fought valiantly for their beliefs and had a fire within them that drove them to victory, but the many of the stormtroopers that enlisted just did so that they could simply eat. Not only were the stormtroopers untrained, but the clones were specifically bred for combat and trained under the best combat preparation programs in the galaxy. Many have theorized that this is why Vader was a frequent client of Boba Fett and employed the bounty hunter on numerous occasions when a basic battalion of stormtroopers would have sufficed. And it's likely that he appreciated working alongside the infamous bounty hunter for this very same reason that he admired the clone troopers. As a clone, Boba would have likely reminded Vader of his time alongside Rex and would have instilled a certain sense of faith in Boba's abilities. This, paired with Boba's reputation and the roster of successful jobs that he had under his belt, and it's likely that Boba Fett was the closest Vader would find to a seasoned clone, one that he could routinely work alongside for the duration of his career. But anyway, students of the Force, what do you think of this relationship that Vader shared with the clones even after the rise of the Empire? And do you think this is why Vader liked working alongside Boba Fett? And what do you think life would have been like for a clone after the end of the war? As always, acolytes, thank you so much for watching the channel. May the Force be with you, and have a great day.